everyone, and welcome to On Aging. I'm so excited to kick off On Aging 2021. And to do so, I'm delighted to introduce Gene Statler, CEO of Alliance for Lifetime Income. Gene, on behalf of ASA, I wanted to share my gratitude for ALI's support of ASA's mission. Gene, take it away.
Thank you, Peter. As he said, my name's Gene. I'm the CEO of the Alliance for Lifetime Income, and it's my pleasure to introduce to you today Ken Dychtwald and his session. I was introduced to Ken a few years ago when we were looking to work with leaders in the fields of retirement and aging. Years of research have showed us that the number one concern of Americans in retirement was running out of money. And so we created our nonprofit association with a bold vision to live in a country where no American has to face the prospect of running out of money in retirement. We invite everyone to visit our website at protectedincome.org. As you know, we've been experiencing the greatest surge of retirees in our country, our country's history, as 10,000 baby boomers turn 65 every day. This will continue until we reach a major milestone in 2024, where there will be more people 65 ever than in our history of the United States. We call it Peak 65. And no one knows these facts better than Ken Dychtwald and this extraordinary panel who have been at the forefront of these issues and trends for many decades. Allow me to first introduce Ken, and then he'll properly introduce his very special co-presenters. Ken is a gerontologist, psychologist, and CEO of AgeWave. And over the past 40 plus years, he has emerged as one of the world's foremost visionaries on aging and the health and financial implications of this age wave. He's the best-selling author of 18 books on aging, health, reinvention purpose, and retirement-related issues. Seems like every time he writes a book, it goes right to the top of the bestseller list. Congrats to that, Ken. Last year, he published What Retirees Want, particularly interest to me since I would love to be in a place in the next couple of years to retire. It's a holistic view of life's third age, and his newest book is actually being released today, Radical Curiosity, One Man's Search for Cosmic Magic and a Purposeful Life. With that, it's my honor for the Alliance for Lifetime Income to be sponsoring this timely panel at Aging in America and to introduce to you Dr. Ken Dychtwald. Hello, Ken.
Hey, Gene. It's great to see you again in this kind of Zoom world we've been living in this last year. And Peter and Michael, so good to see you, gentlemen. First of all, welcome, everybody. I can't even begin to tell you how honored I am to be a part of this panel, to be a part of ASA after 45 years of relationship. And the way this is going to work is that our overall focus is the future of aging and aging services. And we're going to emphasize the whole notion of navigating towards the new era of hope, health, purpose, and equity. This has been an interesting life for all of us, but man, oh man, has this been one challenging, interesting, provocative, motivational, confusing, frightening year we've just come through. So when Peter asked me if I wanted to be involved with ASA this year, I thought, wow, let me see if I could put together the best, most interesting panel I could possibly imagine. So there will be four of us. We will each only have about 11 minutes or so after this setup, and then we're going to have a few minutes to kind of sum up our thinking and our recommendations to you and all the good work you're doing and trying to do. I'll be joined, and I'm going to properly introduce them one by one, but Poo, Kathy Greenlee, and Fernando Torres-Gil. But let me get started. Let me first share with you a little bit of the way I have my own thoughts about the future of aging and aging services. And by the way, I'll tell you that we didn't ask the other panelists to say anything similar to one another or to be right or wrong or to have to win anybody over. We're all going to be offering you our own straight up views about what we think is particularly important. So let me first share with you some slides, and I won't be using many, but I'll give you a little bit of a sense as to how I kind of hold in my mind what the issues are. Next slide, please. Okay, so first, I am always struck by the fact that due to breakthroughs in the 20th century in public health and sanitation and refrigeration and pharmacology and self-health and everything else, we had a huge lift in the average life expectancy. But if you take a look at this next slide, the plot thickens, because based on the work of Leonard Hayflick, in the biology of aging, medical anthropologists have been trying to figure out just what the life expectancy has been over the past 100,000 years. And they now tell us that throughout 98% of human history, the average life expectancy has been under 18. And so everything about this longevity revolution is new. All of the challenges we and this entire conference are going to focus on are new. Now, we may have been hammering away at them for 20 or 30 or 50 years, but we're at the beginning of this new frontier of more and more people living longer and longer lives. Now, there's a lot of focus in our field on what's happening in America, just as in the last, I won't even call him president, I'll say the last character that was in the White House put a lot of focus on America. And I'd like to think in terms of the whole world. When it comes to longevity, we're only a middling country. There are 33 countries in the world that live longer than we do, even though we spend almost twice as much on healthcare per person as every other country in the world. What else do I pay attention to? I've really been captivated in the last decade or two by the difference between lifespan, let's say the average number of years we live, and we know that the potential of the human lifespan is around 140. So living 78 or 79 years is pretty good compared to the past. But I also want to have you think about the idea of health span, which is now being measured as the number of years that people live their lives healthfully. And we in the United States have a very middling health span, meaning that we're going to spend a lot of years on average in a state of ill health, which gives birth to the need for a medical system to care for that, which gives birth to the need for millions of caregivers, which creates great suffering, which costs a fortune. If we could match our health span to our lifespan, we would have an entirely different ecosystem. Another thing I want to call your attention to is that we spend very little money on science in our country, in the world, but particularly in the United States. And so for every dollar we spend looking after people with Alzheimer's, we spend less than a half a penny on trying to beat the disease in the first place. That is misguided. I know that iGen is going to talk about the new infrastructure for caregiving, and President Biden is giving a great heartbeat to that. But we need a new infrastructure for health and medicine. Another interesting point is that no matter who you are, whether you're in the not-for-profit or for-profit sector, whether you're in the funereal business or caregiving business, or whether you build houses, you have to be struck by the fact that due to the age wave that was kicked in motion a number of years ago, there's going to be a massive growth in the number of older adults over the next decade. Now, last point in terms of my background slides, there's some good news coming here. There's a silver lining. Because of empty nesting and retirement, boomers in the United States are now going to have more time affluence than any human being in history. 2.5 trillion hours of free time. Worldwide, 50 trillion hours of free time. And that's something the world has never seen. Now, let me go through a few key points, and I'm going to focus on 4 different elements today, and I'm just going to be very simple because we've got a lot to cover in this panel. I see challenge number 1. 65 is not old anymore. We all know that. In fact, I'm in sort of the Bernice Newgarden school of gerontology that says that we shouldn't be measuring people by age at all. We should be measuring need, capability, possibilities, not just age. And so inadvertently tagging an age and then rendering it as a period of disengagement has given birth to a huge amount of ageism in the media and marketing and education and social services and healthcare and even the workforce. I think we need to think more in terms of a cyclic life plan where people reinvent themselves and get retrained, maybe take sabbaticals, and maybe have a period of time towards the end of their life where they're no longer working. But that old age period should be indexed to longevity. It shouldn't be stuck where Bismarck put it in the 1880s. And also, I would say that old age entitlements should be indexed and targeted to need, but I'm going to get to that in a moment. Next challenge. We need to match health span to lifespan. We talk a lot about income inequality. I am traumatized by what I would call age and health inequality, and you should be too. You take a 50-year-old in America, so who's already lived through childhood trauma, and take a look at their life expectancy. The most entitled Americans have a 15-year higher life expectancy than their brothers and sisters or people across town at the age of 50 who are struggling. That is absolutely unacceptable. What else is unacceptable? We do not have a healthcare system that requires that our healthcare professionals have capabilities in either preventative medicine or geriatric skills. That is unacceptable. We need to create a medical system that helps people and teaches people and cares for people in a way that they will live a healthy, long life. Third, our scientific resources must absolutely be amped up in order to prevent or even cure the major diseases of aging. How absurd that in this era of capitalistic-driven technology, we still have cancer, we still have heart disease, we still have Alzheimer's, we still have diabetes, we still have macular degeneration. Sure, we've made some progress, but we need to end these diseases. And last, within my second challenge, we need an integrated healthcare system. The fact that LTC is off to the side, that palliative care is often not included, that people that do some of the heaviest lifting in our healthcare system are paid a horribly low sum, that the people who make the most money in medicine in America are cosmetic surgeons and geriatricians make the least. Our entire healthcare system needs to be re-envisioned so that we produce a healthier aging. My third challenge, financial well-being for life. As I see this, now that I'm in my 8th decade of life, I think capitalism and individualism have run amok. They've driven inequality, they've driven wealth inequality, aging inequality, and longevity inequality. On top of that, few Americans have a sustainable pattern of savings. That's just not going to make it in a long-lived era. What are my solutions? I think the Social Security and Medicare have got to be stabilized and solidified as a powerful social financial safety net. And I would even give more support to those in need. And I would elevate the age of reception of these benefits. And I would also lift the the maximum amount of income that's targeted as, what is it, $142,800. We've got to create more resources for those older adults who are truly in need. And last, and this is going to sound peculiar, I have been troubled by the fact that the savings rate in America is so horribly low that we could be heading to another era of mass elder poverty, more extreme than anything we've seen since the Great Depression of the 1930s. I've looked at Australia, I've looked at Canada. They mandate savings. I think we should mandate savings as well. And last, I think we need a new purpose for life's third age. The retirement process is an experiment. We're kind of like we're perfecting our union. We're also perfecting our retirement. The fact that we've got 68 million retirees in this country, and last year they watched 48 hours of television a week, doesn't make sense to me. I think we need more intergenerational and interdependent. Enough of this individualism taken to the max. Housing, community clubs, church activities, educational programs, recreation, and work teams. And I'd call, as I have for decades now, to not just the wonderful programs like Eldera and Gen to Gen and Encore, wonderful programs, but I'd say an armied up elder corps, global, where old and young come together, as Maggie Kuhn might have envisioned it, to make it a better world. Let me end by saying that I think there's a role for us in all of this. I think that we in the field of gerontology need to become society's futurists. We need to steer the ship wisely, holistically, and equitably. And I believe with our leadership, we can build the bridge to tomorrow's multiracial, multi-ethnic, multi-generational, and far more equitable society. Now, take a deep breath. I've been charging along. Let me introduce the next presenter in this panel. We are so fortunate to have one of the busiest women in the world and one of the most important women in the world. In fact, Poo was recently voted by Time magazine as one of the 100 most influential people in the world. She's an activist and the director of Caring Across Generations, a national coalition of 200 advocacy organizations working to transform the long-term care system in the U.S. with a deep focus on the needs of aging Americans, people with disabilities, and their caregivers. Hi, Jen.
Ken, thank you so much. It's such an honor to be with you and on this esteemed panel of giants in our field. Truly, I'm looking forward to this conversation. And I come to the field of aging having worked as an organizer for about 25 years in the care economy, organizing with domestic workers, the nannies, house cleaners, and home care workers who do the care and cleaning work in our homes that makes everything else possible in our lives. It's a workforce that is mostly women of color, mostly primary income earners for their families and mothers of young children. And despite how important the work is that they do, it's some of the most undervalued, insecure work in our economy today. The average wages of a home care worker is about $17,000 per year, and 82% of domestic workers don't have a single paid sick day. Back in 2010, NDWA held a national meeting of our members, and something really profound happened. At the meeting, a number of domestic workers who were originally hired as nannies and house cleaners began asking for training in elder care because the families that they work for needed care for an aging relative, and they turned to the only support they had, their domestic workers. And that was the moment that we began to understand in a profound way that our nation is aging, that a demographic shift was underway, and this shift would add an entire generation onto our lifespan and potentially change so much about our lives, and that caregivers, many of them immigrant, were on the front lines of that shift. And as we did more research to understand the context, we realized that we as a nation are wholly unprepared for what was unfolding, what is unfolding, and that the pain points are everywhere. Family caregivers, professional care workers, family caregivers overstretched trying to manage full-time work and almost full-time care for their loved ones, professional care workers who are underpaid and struggling to care for their own families on their income, consumers of care unable to get access to quality, affordable assistance, especially in the home and community. Everyone was struggling. And it was with that realization 10 years ago in 2011 that the Domestic Workers Alliance and Jobs with Justice launched Caring Across Generations. We believed that if we could come together across age, race, and generation, that we could address our shared need for new solutions to bring quality care options to every home in the country and to make every job in the care economy a good job, including for the immigrant workforce. We believe that in this country, we have a caring majority, that the majority of us are actually deeply touched by this issue. And if we could marshal the power of that majority, we could transform the way we care for one another. Since that time, our campaign has been building in states coalitions across workers and consumers, older adults, people with disabilities, family caregivers. We've been giving visibility to this phenomenon of what we call the sandwich generation, people who are pressed between the pressures of caring for young children and aging loved ones. We helped to pass the first family caregiver benefit in Hawaii and the first long-term care benefit in Washington. And under the Obama administration, we helped to bring 2 million home care workers under minimum wage protections. And doing this work, we realized two really profound things. One is that the care economy is a part of the economy where a whole bunch of people that we have devalued and in some instances treated as disposable are concentrated. Women of color, immigrants, older people, people with disabilities, and that we've somehow designed our economy to undervalue and devalue the things that actually matter most. The people who raised us, who cared for us, who taught us our values, the women who care for us every day on top of everything else, the mostly women of color who care as professionals, the independence and the human dignity of people with disabilities and older adults in this country. What could be more important? And that the second insight was that people see care in this country as an individual burden and responsibility, that if somehow we can't figure it out, it's because we failed. And if we can't manage childcare, it's because we don't have the right job. Or if we can't afford home care, it's because we didn't save. But the truth is that we're all experiencing it. And we need a different framework. And so we realized that in order to catalyze meaningful change, we would need a new story about what really matters in our lives and in our economy, and what kind of support we need to truly live, work, and care well with dignity. We would need to help people understand that we are fundamentally interdependent, that we all need support to be full participants in society and in our economy, and that in the 21st century in particular, we need to think about and invest in care as essential infrastructure, as a public good. We need to invest and value care as fundamental to every aspect of our lives, because it is. And little did we know that it would take a pandemic to open up the cultural space for real progress. The pandemic revealed just how much in our economy, just how much work in our economy is actually essential to our safety and our well-being, but we undervalue it, like care work. And just how unsustainable it is for us to rely upon the underpaid women of color care professionals or the unpaid family caregivers as our default care infrastructure. As we watched nursing homes be evacuated and children kept home from school and daycare, women were pushed out of the workforce in shocking numbers, especially women of color, because of caregiving challenges. And the women working as essential care workers, putting their own safety and that of their families on the line every day to keep the people we love safe. We have now this new line of sight into our reality and a new awareness about what we need and what is essential. It's a rare moment of opportunity, one that only comes around once every few generations, to reset our economy to better fit our lives and to support our future. And more importantly, to value and support what matters most, our ability to care for one another and the people we love. Last week, the president announced his jobs and infrastructure plan, and it included a big investment in home and community-based services to expand access to care in the home and community for the growing aging population and people with disabilities, and to make the jobs in our care economy good jobs. It's transformative and profound, and the result of decades of work on the part of many people, including some of the people on this panel, like Fernando, who I've learned so much from. This is our caring majority moment. It's our opportunity to build the care infrastructure we need for the 21st century, and it's up to us to make it real. We have just launched a new coalition effort called Care Can't Wait, and we hope that you will join us in this effort to realize this incredible historic moment of opportunity to build the care infrastructure we need to live well. Back to you, Ken.
Quick question before I introduce Kathy. Your heartbeat seems to be lifting up this whole new vision. How do you keep your hope so positive and so full during such a tough time?
I think I learned it from my grandmother. I think it's in my DNA. My grandmother played a huge role in raising me, and she believes that optimism is a strategy, and that hope is a form of planning, as Gloria Steinem would say. And I think I have come to believe that it's an incredibly effective strategy for survival, but also for winning.
I would say that those of us who are older and been in this field a long while, we are so proud of you. We are so honored that you have found a way to wield such great power in the world, and hopeful that we can help you achieve this optimism as a strategy and bring more attention to the role of caring in our lives that's been so devalued. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Ken.
So let me introduce our next speaker on this panel. I feel a little bit like Kurosawa today, the Seven Samurai. I feel like we're gathering these folks together, hopefully to fight a new fight. Kathy Greenlee was appointed by President Barack Obama as the 4th United States Assistant Secretary on Aging. She's a lawyer by training, and I've known Kathy for a number of years. She is a warrior. She's a visionary thought leader, policy expert, and advocate with 20 years of executive experience in health and human services. She's a fierce defender of the legal and social rights. And I also want to say protections, not just rights, but protections, because there's so much abuse, there's so much disregard, there's so much advantage being taken of elders and their families. So Kathy, let me turn it to you.
Thank you so much, Ken. It's a real honor to be here with you, with iGen, and with Fernando Torres-Gil, who was the first U.S. Assistant Secretary for Aging. So very much my predecessor in this work. I'm honored to join you all today and give some of my thoughts on the future and some opportunities. Even though I'm going to start with a slide that's pretty negative. I want to talk about when healthy aging fails. And Ken, this really connects to the point you were raising about making sure that we have a health span that meets our lifespan. And there are times when that doesn't happen and things fall apart as people age. And that's what I want to address. It's been about a decade now since I spoke at an ASA plenary in Washington. We were at the Wardman Hotel. And I talked about elder abuse and neglect for the first time in front of this audience. It's very likely my colleagues here, as members of ASA and people participating in the conference, it's very likely you've heard me talk about elder abuse and neglect. Really, a kickoff for me in that work, in a very visible way, was at a plenary here at this conference. At the end of that speech, I asked people 3 questions. So 10 years later, I'd like to remind you, because these have stood the test of time for me. I have used them and continue to use them when I talk about the issue of elder abuse and neglect. First, I ask, are any of the older adults you know abused? And then I tell people this is the only question that's easy, because we know from the National Elder Maltreatment Study that 1 in 10 older adults are abused. The second question I asked then and now is, do you know who they are? This is a question ultimately about visibility, noticing, and screening. Over the years, as I've talked to audiences and done presentations, what I've learned is most people in the field of aging who do social services, healthcare services, some people in financial services have seen people who are abused. but very few people are actually screening. Very few professionals are looking for abuse. They run across it instead. And there are some tools out there for screening, but they're seldom used. The third question I ask is, do you know what they need from you? The field of elder abuse and the field of aging sometimes can be both ageist, I think, and paternalistic. And it's important that we ask when we're talking about abuse and neglect, what the other person needs from us, not the other way around. It's not about us, what we should do for them, but what do older people need? One of the greatest gaps in the field of working on abuse and neglect is the absence of voice and leadership of the older people themselves who are being abused. They're largely not involved, and that's a sorely missing gap. So you, in introducing me, Ken, talked about my background as a lawyer. It's interesting to have worked in the field of aging for most of my career, but I'm not a gerontologist. I'm certainly not a geriatrician. My background is a little different, and I think, frankly, one of the benefits of ASA and this conference has always been the convening of those of us from different disciplines, bringing us together to talk about aging from different lenses. Mine certainly is, as a lawyer, as a policy expert, someone with 25 years of service in government. Ultimately, I see myself as an advocate, which is why I've gravitated to this particular issue. I focused on providing leadership as assistant secretary, working on program innovation and data collection. And I'm very proud of what I was able to contribute to the field. I think there's many things we got right. But over the last certainly 5 years since I left Washington, I have wondered myself if maybe I was also half misdirected. And I want to show you why I've started to think about that. Sometimes in talking about abuse and neglect in particular, there's not a perpetrator. This isn't a situation where there's always a responsible party other than the older person. There are people who age in place poorly, who can't care for themselves very well. They often have some sort of physical impairment or mental impairment, diminished capacity. Many are isolated. They may or may not be lower income. People who can age in place poorly may have access to money but not spend it well because they may be challenged with their own finances, and they are disconnected from health and social services. These are people who, community members, Ken, you talked about community and interdependence. These are people who community members know about, and they are called different things. People who are hoarders would be in this category, but that's a narrow aspect. I visited a woman with Adult Protective Services here in Kansas City who had just become disconnected a decade ago. Her family had moved away. She didn't have, again, local caregivers who were checking in on her. She still had dreams of having a slumber party for women her age, and she lived in a house that was just full and had very little food. I'm not sure she had running water. I visited a woman in Texas who had aged in place in her home. Her car was out front, but someone in the neighborhood had stolen the wheels, not just the tires, the wheels, so it was sitting on block. These are people who are isolated. Every word we have to describe them is negative, mostly pejorative. What we refer to in my community when I grew up were shut-ins, people who really have disappeared into their home without services or supports. And in the field of geriatrics and people in healthcare, they call this geriatric syndrome. So those of you watching who are in that field would recognize people who are old and not well and alone. It is Adult Protective Services that's charged with responding to calls and complaints about people in this category. And every state responds to calls from Adult Protective Services. One of the things we were able to create when I was at the Administration for Community Living and Administration on Aging is a national database to collect data from states about their experience in receiving calls to Adult Protective Services and responding. And when I say I wonder recently if I was half misdirected, it's because of the data that we've now learned. And I have a graphic here. This is from the 2019 report, the most current report from ACL. Of the cases that are investigated by Adult Protective Services, half of them, 51%, are self-neglect. That's what APS labels the kinds of individual I'm talking about on the prior slide. Half of the time that states are spending investigating is in people in this category where there's not an abuser to prosecute. It's not a matter of law enforcement. And this is an issue of aging. A third of the cases that they're investigating are people over the age of 75 in this category of self-neglect. Nearly 80% of the people that they're investigating under a case of self-neglect are over the age of 60. Self-neglect is a matter of aging and aging poorly. And the issues are very complex. They center on autonomy, diminished capacity. And they're issues that I think APS should not be handling alone, that I think we can help in this issue. What Adult Protective Services typically does is do some short-term case management and help people connect to aging services. So there are supporters in the field, but I think there's much more that we could do together, that this is the work of the field of aging, that vulnerability is part of aging. And the condition of neglect itself is dehumanizing. So how can we help? And I know that what we're talking about here is navigating towards a new era of hope, health, purpose, and equity. And so I want to tie this back. A year ago, at the end of February, on the eve of the pandemic, the National Academies of Medicine issued this consensus study report on social isolation and loneliness in older adults. And I just want to give a shout out to Lisa Ryerson and AARP Foundation, who sponsored this, and encourage everyone to look at this. What we proved, I wasn't on the panel, but what this group proved is that social isolation and loneliness is bad for older people's health, and we must all work together to tackle social isolation. We can do this if we find ways to maintain connection, if we prioritize services, and if we really commit ourselves to resilience and helping people who have been in this condition of neglect and disconnect become resilient. And I think there are promising practices in the field. I think the capable model that was developed at Johns Hopkins is helpful. I also want to give a shout out to the John A. Hartford Foundation and the Institute for Healthcare Improvement for their work on age-friendly health systems. We need to look comprehensively at a person-centered approach to care and look at people who are failing and bring all that we have to bear in this field to keep people connected so they can have that good long life, Ken, that you talk about and you envision as we really bridge the gap between what people are doing in a way that's healthy and where things are starting to fall apart. So I think there's work we can do together. Thanks.
Kathy, can I ask you a question or two before we transition to Fernando?
Yeah.
So I was reflecting as I was listening to that years ago, Robert Butler, friend of all of ours, mentor to me, mentor probably to all of us. Bob once explained to me that he felt that doctors and most professionals in America suffered from the yavis syndrome. And I didn't know what he was talking about. So I said, what is the yavis syndrome? And he said, people in the medical field prefer to work with folks who are young, attractive, verbal, intelligent, and single. And he says, it's not just doctors, it's home builders, marketers, advertisers. We got a problem. How do we get our hands around a culture that is in denial of aging or devalues, as Jen was emphasizing, older people and allows there to be abuse and self-neglect? If you could wave a magic wand, what could happen that would sort of bring this to an end, that would put us into a new era?
It's ageism. The language that we use reveals how we feel as a society. I find the term self-neglect to be terribly pejorative, and I know that's redundant, but to be pejorative, that people in this condition of neglect are making decisions on their own. We may question the wisdom of those decisions. But this is a societal problem. There are people who we begin to label as non-compliant, people who stop showing up, people who make decisions that are a little bit different. And I think that it is easy to start dismissing people who have presented troubling behavior or troubling decisions, and that it's just a part of the systems that we have built. If we had more older people in this work, I think we could make changes. But Ken, I think this is about ageism, it's also very hard. So I met Dr. Butler once, Bob Butler once. To his point, these are hard cases. APS workers and clinicians will tell you these are hard cases. These are not easy solutions. So I'm not Pollyanna, but I do believe that we can maintain connection and improve people's lives and still support their autonomy and respect them as they age.
Thank you. All right, so let me make the transition to our next speaker. We will all four be coming back together in a few minutes, but I'm very honored to present our next speaker. Dr. Fernando Torres-Gil is an old friend of Western Gerontological Society, then became ASA. He's also an old friend of mine. He was the first appointed United States Assistant Secretary on Aging, President Bill Clinton. He's a longtime warrior, grappler in defense of older adults, minorities, and people with disabilities. He himself is a polio survivor, and he's one of 9 children of migrant farm-working immigrants. His multifaceted career spans the academic, professional, and policy arenas. He's a professor of social welfare and public policy at UCLA, an adjunct professor of gerontology at USC, and director of the UCLA Center for Policy Research on Aging. And I will say, having spent 45 years in this field, if there were a Mount Rushmore of the great figures in our field, Fernando's face would be number 1. My friend, Fernando.
Thank you, Ken. With that kind of introduction, I feel like I should simply say it was great being with you. Thank you, and have a good rest of the day.
But I do notice every time I Zoom with you, you seem to have another diploma on the wall, so I don't know what you've been up to.
No, thank you, Ken. And what a treat to be with Agen and with Kathy, and to be on this panel, and to be with the American Society on Aging, which has been my evolution in the field of aging, and I owe so much to WGS as well as ASA. Let me just say, for Ken, each of us have a role to play throughout our careers, our lifespan, and certainly in our later years as elders. And I'm proud to say I'm now an elder. I'm 72. I think that's a pretty cool age, but each of us has a role. Ken, in my view, and the time I've known him, has been crossing boundaries for us, bringing many of us in one space, whether it's public, academic, social. You've brought us to other spaces, whether it's technology, the corporate community, the private sector, and that gives the field of aging far greater influence than any one of us could have done. Thank you, Ken, for being our guru in crossing boundaries. Agen, you now have seen the culmination of your hard work over the last 20, 30 years. President Biden's American Recovery Act is not a culmination, but an indication that Agen has change the public narrative about how we view long-term care, home care workers, the immigrant workforce, the role of women. Agen has almost single-handedly, but with thousands of others behind her, you have now brought the caring economy front and center on the national agenda. Agen, we owe you a debt of gratitude. And for Kathy, I was the first assistant secretary, but I have to be honest, Kathy took it way beyond what I had the ability to do as the first person. Kathy brought the legal, technical, regulatory expertise. She knew how to work complex systems. And Kathy gave us something that I failed at in my term, trying to bring aging and disability together. And I thank you, Kathy Greenlee, for creating the Administration for Community Living and showing at the national level why aging, disability, home care, long-term care supports must come together. So I'm indebted to the three of you and to all the members. And speaking of a new role of elders, I'd like to spend a few minutes on, perhaps I just came from teaching my morning class on macro social policy at UCLA. I'd like to move to the macro level, if I may use that term. And I think Agen said quite accurately, we are at a rare moment of opportunity where there may be a paradigm shift, where we may be moving from the last 40, 50 years, which was heavily about individual personal responsibility, pushing aside the role of government, leaving it to individuals to survive as best they can. We may be in this great opportunity where the pandemic, sadly, with all its disparities and tragedies, has revealed the last 40, 50 years, the structural flaws in our society, whether economic, racial, nativist, social, political, whether we're liberals or conservative or moderates, regardless of our ideological, philosophical point of view, I think we all have to acknowledge society needs fixing. I don't think any one of us wants to grow older in a society where some of us do super well. Many of us are left tragically alone to suffer. And the rest of us are just struggling and trying to decide, am I going to be one of the isolated elders, or am I going to be relatively privileged? So I believe we're at this moment of transition. And not to be political, I believe that this current administration is giving us what some of us have described, certainly in my op-ed pieces, as a New Deal, where we once again recognize that we need a collective responsibility. Government, the private sector, entrepreneurs, to address these fundamental flaws in our society. And why should we be concerned? Because one of the great benefits of this new era is that if we do all the right things, we have the real possibility to live a good, long life, well into our 80s, 90s, and to be centenarians. And Ken, you've addressed many of those trends. Sadly, not all of us will live a good, long life. Certainly those of community of colors, African Americans, Latinx, API, have less opportunities to live a good, long life. But even other segments, we now see for the first time a decline in life expectancy among working age white males without a college education, a reversal in their life expectancy. Lots of reasons for that. But I do believe that we're now hopefully on the cusp of trying to come up with a new social contract. And in this regard, I'd like to make a couple of provocative suggestions, if I may. I came of age in the last 40 years into the field of gerontology, when our approach was to advocate for older persons and promote programs based on becoming old and develop eligibility criteria based on being old. Whether it was age 65 initially for Social Security and Medicare, whether it's age 60 for the Older Americans Act, whether it's age 40 for the Age Discrimination and Employment Act, or, and I was a proud member of AARP, age 50 to be a member of AARP. I now realize in my old age, I think we created and promoted an ageist set of public benefits. I benefit from that. I love my Medicare. I love my Social Security check. But over the last 40, 50 years, we realized we left behind everyone else that wasn't of that particular age. I'm reminded now as an elder of some of the giants in the field. And Ken, you certainly mentioned Dr. Butler, our great esteemed friend who has left us. Bernice Newgarden used to debate me when I was appointed to the Federal Council on Aging by President Carter, and I pushed for age-based solutions, and she kept saying, no, Fernando, it's not age, it's need, the age versus need. Back then, Bernice Newgarden in the 80s, 70s and 80s was arguing we should look at needs, not an artificial age construct. Bob Binstock, my mentor, the chair of my dissertation committee, used to tell me when I would say, older folks, we got the political power, and he would tell me about the political bluff. Older voters, ultimately, it's not that they're old and determines how they vote, but it's based upon their particular needs, whether it's family, grandchildren, safe streets, incomes. And then I'm reminded of Maggie Kuhn, who inspired many of us. Maggie Kuhn told us about the power of outrage, the sexism, the ageism, especially for women. And she really told us at some point, you got to be pissed off to really get out there and make change. That was Maggie Kuhn. Maggie Kuhn also told us that you can be 90 years of age and still have lots of fun. And she knew how to have fun in many different ways. But in either event, I'm reminded about these great giants that have preceded us, but certainly continue to influence us. I'm now at a point, and I look to Kathy and Agen and you, Ken, and everyone else in the audience, perhaps in this rare moment of opportunity, this potential transformative moment where the public narrative is now accepting and ready for new ways of thinking, because we've all suffered in the last year. We now all see the structural flaws and the disparities of the last 40, 50 years. Perhaps we should move and start thinking about restructuring programs like Social Security and Medicare. Perhaps it's time now to really promote a guaranteed minimum income. Social Security cannot just be for those of us that are 65, 67, or are so disabled that we qualify for SSDI. Perhaps it's now time to broaden Social Security to be available for all of us at any age. Certainly Medicare, I think it's time now for a Medicare for all, certainly we will keep those basic programs which have had important legacy benefits, but now isn't it the opportunity to broaden the kind of universal protections of these age-based programs to make them available for all other ages? And I do have a selfish motive for this. I'm a Latino, as Ken pointed out. I grew up in an immigrant background. As Agen has highlighted, the future of this country is diversity. The future of this country is immigrants. The future of this country is refugees and foreign workers, if I can add that. And if we're going to ensure that these new diverse populations, as this country moves towards majority minority status, now estimated by the Census Bureau to be by 2046, not 2050, which is always the year I looked at. We now need to start thinking about how we invest in these new diverse populations, how we try to move beyond the xenophobia, nativism, racism, which separates these groups, whether it's advocating for Black lives and advocating to avoid in the future the suffering that George Floyd faced, whether it's dealing with the vicious, terrible attacks on Asian American elders, whether it's the children unaccompanied at the border, whether it's refugees that have served the U.S. military in Iraq and Afghanistan that want to come here to be safe. We now need to think about how we move beyond what's been known as identity politics, which is every group advocating for themselves. What are the common needs that we all have? And it almost goes back to, and I hope I don't sound too naive, it almost goes back to what we used to refer to as the American dream, which in its fundamental aspects is, regardless of our backgrounds, what is it we most want and need? I believe all of us have always wanted a chance to have a good education, a decent job, see our kids and other people's kids do well. But I think we will add to that now that we all want retirement security, and we want to know as we grow old that we'll be in a care economy. So I'd like to see how we can now, in our new elder age, begin to take advantage of this new era and begin to recreate a social construct, a social contract that brings us together around these fundamental needs. So thank you for the opportunity to share these thoughts, and I now turn it over to you, Ken.
Well, Fernando, I see you have taken the gloves off at this stage in your life. Lucky us. We got Ijen and Kathy back. I've got a few questions of you, my friends. One of them is 6 years ago, I became eligible for Social Security. So I get a document like this each month, and on the upper left, it says, your Medicare premium bill. And on the upper right, it says, this is not a bill. Now, I'm a reasonably clever guy. I've been in the field a long time. This is not user-friendly to me. Do you guys get the feeling, and I'd like to hear from each of you, that the aging and health services in this country are easy to understand or easy to navigate or easy to use? Fernando, why don't you start us off? Quick question, quick answer.
Absolutely not. I mean, put yourself in a position of a Spanish-speaking older woman in East Los Angeles whose children have moved away. She's on her own. And I have a number of ancianos, elder friends, Spanish-speaking, that had no clue how to get their vaccine, much less how to navigate Social Security, Medicare, Medi-Cal, et cetera. Fortunately, some of us will step in. It's a fragmented, complex, uncoordinated system that we've developed over the last decades, over the last 60, 70 years, which is why I looked in part to Kathy, who has a much better understanding of how to deal with these complex systems.
Thank you. I'd like to hear from Kathy and then Jen. Do you feel that what we've currently got in America is a bundle of systems that are user-friendly? Kathy, any thoughts?
Oh, I agree with Fernando. They're absolutely not user-friendly. Absolutely not. And from every aspect, whether you're looking at social care needs, acute care needs. I mean, you mentioned palliative care and hospice earlier. Long-term care needs, they're not navigable. Talk to those of us in the field who try to assist a family member or loved one, and we know the work. And it's like, oh my goodness, trying to get eligible for Medicaid and Medicaid spin down. I mean, those of us in the field struggle with this. It's not user friendly at all. And my root cause analysis for that often comes back to law and money, which separate these systems in such a way that it makes it hard to bridge across them.
Thank you. Jen, what are your thoughts about this?
I can only agree and add that there are growing numbers of undocumented elders in our country who are not eligible for many of these programs, and I think that is incredibly tragic and also dangerous because of just how interdependent we are. And so, and many of the care workers themselves are aging. We have many members who are working well into their 70s and 80s as professional care workers, no access to health care, no access to any of these benefits, and don't know when or if they will ever be able to retire. So I do think that there are some deep issues here that need to be addressed.
Next question. We've got room for just maybe two more, but certainly one more for each of you. Fernando opened up an interesting theme, which is that it's become more regular to talk about how movies and television are ageist. People over 50 make up a substantial over 100 million people, yet only 20% of the characters we see in movies and TV shows. The medical field is ageist. Housing industry, only 5% of the housing stock is aging friendly, so there's $200 billion spent each year due to falls in people's own homes. What about the aging field itself? Do you feel that this field of aging and aging services is ageist? I'd like to hear each of your reflections on that question. Who'd like to go first? You're smiling, Agen, so I'm going to ask you to go first.
I think that the field needs to become more integrated with other fields because the experience of aging is always in context. And what we found to be really powerful is talking about elder care in the context of childcare and paid leave and what multi-generational families need holistically in order to take care of each other. And I would love to see more of the field connect to other related fields that are about our well-being, our collective well-being.
Thank you. Kathy, any thoughts on whether this field itself is ageist?
I do believe there are aspects that are ageist, but I also think it's evolving. So, Ken, I just want to, as a final comment, give a shout out to people who are younger than you and me, who are entering the field. You and I have talked about, we both have March birthdays. We're 10 years apart, but it's really important that young people come in. I met Bob Butler. I never met Arthur Fleming, Claude Pepper. I mean, I also see myself as a part of a transition, but we need younger people who bring fresh ideas about aging and the services and the type of integration that Igene's talking about.
Thank you. Fernando, to you, and then I'm going to close up with one final comment. Fernando, you think the field itself is ageist?
The field of aging, by necessity, has to focus on older adults and the aging process, whether it's gerontology or geriatrics. However, the field itself, and I think it's now moving in this direction, needs to bring in that lifespan perspective to avoid any remnants of aging, to sort out when it's good to do something for someone over 50, it's good to do something for under 50. And it has to bring in that equity lens. So I think we've moved beyond the blatant kind of old people are the only thing we care about now to how can we all age throughout the life process. I will say, here's where my concern is about the field, not the question you posed now, but my concern is that aging has become so mainstream and trendy that we're getting a lot of folks into the field of aging that have no interest about understanding gerontology and geriatrics, but are coming into it because it's an emerging market, a chance to make money off of old people and their products. And it's really geared towards that more affluent segment. I'm more worried about those coming in because they want to take advantage of the field and not because they care about the persons that we want to serve.
Okay, in our last seconds here, I'm going to ask each of you to share with me just one word, not a sentence, one word. When you think of the future of aging and aging services, one word that you would comes to your mind. Who'd like to go first? Or I'll pick. Kathy, go ahead. One word.
Intersectional.
Igen?
Care.
Fernando?
Legacy.
And I would say interdependence. And I want to thank Peter Kaldis for doing such a spectacular job during this last year and bringing this meeting together, and the folks from the Alliance for Lifetime Income for allowing us to be with you here today. Thank you, my friends. Wishing you all the best. Stay healthy, stay safe. See you again.